Hey guys, this is Varun talking to you. Today I have the Karanakuta website for you. And within the Karanakuta website, I have some elements which I feel would be great to learn how to make or create. So the first element that I would like to start with is this image. So if you have an image and you hover over the image, you will actually see that text will show up and the background of the image will actually darken. And the same with this kind of image over here and several of the images on our Khan Academy website. So now the question is, how do we actually write the code for this? So there's several components to writing code that actually has this feature. One of them is known as HTML, or Hypertext Markup Language. It's a language of the web and will actually allow you to create the basic building blocks of any website. It's necessary to build any website. The second building block is known as CSS, or Cascading Style Sheets. This is needed to actually design or color any of the images. Or so, for example, if you look up here, this red color, the navigation bar, this navigation bar actually is designed or given the red color through CSS. So as you can see, it's probably needed. Otherwise, you will only have a black and white web page. So now let's go ahead and begin writing some code, and maybe you guys will get a better idea of how exactly this works. So as you can see here, I have some very basic blank HTML page. And essentially, I'll begin writing the code. You can follow along with me. And the first thing we will begin writing is HTML code. So the first thing I'll write is not doc type HTML. And what this signifies is that this is actually an HTML document, and it's needed for the browser to know this is an HTML document. Without it, it's kind of it's not good penmanship, or it's not good habit to write or not include that signature. The next thing we will include is an HTML tag and a closing HTML tag. So opening and closing tags are used often in any markup language. And as you know, this is hypertext markup language. So the opening tag will signify that a building block is started, and this closing tag will signify that it has ended. So within these two tags, we will write the HTML code. The next thing we will include, and notice I indent. The reason why I indent is so you can clearly see when a block has begun and when a block has ended. So I write a head. So what head is known for is including links to other files. Essentially, in the head tag, the DOM, or the document object model, for those who don't know what that is and is new to web development, you can Google it. The document object model loads the files located in the DOM or in the head tag first. So we want the CSS file to be included immediately. So we will actually include that directly here. As you can see, I have named the CSS file KKNY3. Okay, and the CSS is the extension. So we will discuss, we have obviously not created the CSS file yet, but we will discuss what's included in the CSS file later on in the video. The second thing I include is a div. So the div tag is a division tag, and what that does is it separates content from each other. So within this div tag, we want to include an image. So essentially, the purpose of this division tag is that if we hover over this div, we will actually show the text that we need, and we will darken the image. That's the functionality we want. So we have created a div to separate that specific component. So now within the ID, we will include a name called hover over. So what is ID? ID is a part of HTML which allows you to separate components from each other. So we may have separate divs within this example. Let's say we have a div here, and we have another div here, and we also have another div here, and we have a div ending block here. Differentiate this division from the other divisions, we need to give it an ID. By giving it an ID, we can actually give it properties in the CSS file. That's why it is extremely useful. So let me go ahead and delete these blocks, unnecessary. So now within this div tag, we will include an image. As you can see, the image tag begins with IMG, standing for image, and SRC means source. So within this, after this equal sign, we will include the location of the image that we want. So I have already downloaded an image from Google. You can go ahead and go to Google Images and find a suitable image and download it as well. If you're joining us on the tutorial session itself, we can provide you with the image as to what image we'll be using. So as you can see, I have an opening close tag and we have provided the image. Then we will also include a separate div for the text that we would like to show within the image. As you can see, we will name this website tutorial session. Okay, so now the question is, what does this look like without any CSS? As you can see, we do not have actual CSS file here. We have linked a non-existing file. So if I hit save, and I actually save this file, save this as kkny3 and replace the previous file. Yes, I would like to replace. And now let's go ahead and actually open up that file. As you can see, this is just a basic image, no functionality, and it has the word website tutorial session at the bottom. Oops, I'm sorry, I have not shown you guys the screen. Let's switch. So now, as you can see, you have an image with the word website tutorial session at the bottom, and we do not have the hover over functionality like I have shown you prior. Remember, the functionality that we want to see is if I hover over, we will see the image, and this will also, you see the image. So the reason for this, the reason we don't have this functionality is because we don't have the CSS file just yet. So we should go ahead and actually include the CSS file. So now I will go back and include the CSS file. So the next step is to actually include the kkny3.css file. Okay. So as you can see, we have a hover over element. And in order to have the background image become darker when we hover over the element, we will give that specific div with the ID of hover over a background color of black. See, now you can understand why IDs are very useful. We have just selected this specific division element and given it the background color of black. We will also give the width of this element 100%. So then it takes up the entire page. The width of the div is, remember, is provided by 100%. But now, if we want to specify the opacity of an element or how well you can see it, we will give that opacity 1.0, meaning initially this division has complete clear opacity. So there's nothing that you cannot see in the div yet. After this, we will actually say that the image within hover over, so this image located in hover over, we will provide that a transition of 0.7 seconds. And we will provide the width of this element is already 100%, but the div was 100%, as you can see here. But we will also want the image to be 100%. So we will give the width 100%. Now, if you want the transitioning to work in all other browsers, we should have to include separate transition elements. So by including WebKit transition all and 0.7 seconds, this specific item will work in Safari. So without this, if you are running Safari, you will not see any transitions. If you do this, you will see transitions taking place in Mozilla Firefox. And finally, this is for Opera. Not many people use Opera, but we have to include functionality for all browsers. Lastly, yes, sorry, that's it. So now, just to reiterate, we have the hover over element, and within the hover over div, we have an image located within it, and we want to say that image will have a transition property of 0.7 seconds. So when someone hovers over it, it will transition from light to dark in 0.7 seconds. So that way, that transition does not happen immediately and it looks a little bit more smooth. The next thing we will do is we will identify the hover over property. As you can see here, this element over here specifies when we hover over the div hover over, we will change the properties of this image. So again, we have the hover over div. When we hover over this div, we want to change the image property. So when hovered over, we will change this image property. So what we will do is when we hover over that element, we will change the opacity to 0.7, and that will allow us to see the black color behind the div. So remember, we have set the background color equal to black of hover over, and when we change the opacity of the image, which is over the div, when we change the opacity to 0.7 seconds, the black color of the background will show. This will give it a fade out look, and it looks pretty nice actually. So as you can see, we have included that functionality, that when we hover over, we will change the opacity. And lastly, we need to, the last hover over item we need to include is when we hover over the text, right? As you can see, this is ID of text. When we hover over the div, we want the text property to change by giving it an opacity of 1. So we want to actually show the text. And initially, the text does not have any opacity, so it's hidden. Only when you hover over the division element, we will actually see the text. So initially, we will give the opacity of this element to be 0. So again, after hovering over this div, we will give this specific div an opacity of 1. But prior to that, it has an opacity of 0. Right? So the next thing we will do is the font size should have 20 pixels. This obviously specifies the font size. We will give the color of the text to be white. And then we want to specify that when the hover over occurs and we show the element or the text by giving it an opacity of 1, we want to transition from opacity of 0 to opacity of 1 in 0.7 seconds. So this will allow the transition between opacity of 1 and 0 to occur in 0.7 seconds. And again, lastly, these last 1 lines of code is for different browsers. So this is for Opera, this is for Mozilla, and this is for Safari. And lastly, this property must be included as well. As you can see now, we have almost everything, but just to reiterate, initially the hover over div has a background color of black. So this division element has a background color of black. Afterwards, after hovering over it, we will convert the image to opacity of 0.7. Prior to this, that same image has an opacity of 1, right? So this image actually has an opacity of 1. And actually, we missed a line. Let's include opacity of 1 here. And then when hovering over the text, so again, this will specify that we have hovered over this div. We will change the property of the text to 1. Prior to hovering over, the same text has an opacity of 0. So only when hovering over it will we see the change. Now that we are done, all I need to do is save the file name as kkny3.css. So let's do that. Okay. And as you can see, we may have issues or bugs if I missed a semicolon. You always have to include a semicolon after every single line. Sometimes you may miss missed this, so it's important to look again and to see if you did. And I don't think I did, but we will find out. Right. So as you can see now, we have the same image, but now when I hover over it, the background color becomes black, and we now see the words website tutorial session on the bottom. So if I hover over, the background color becomes black because we changed the opacity of the image, and then we changed the opacity of the text to 1. So as you can see, it looks clean. But obviously the image is not fit for the size, so it looks a little bit diluted. But if you look at something like this, the contrast between the image and the background is very clean. So it's important to pick the correct image, actually. So I want to thank you guys for watching this video. I appreciate it. And hopefully we will be having more sessions like this in the future. And this should actually become a common occurrence. So thank you, and see you next time.